All right, everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Kirsten Snow. I'm the Director of Communications for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. And today we are doing the initial response to Governor Wolf's proposed 2022-23 executive budget. And we'll be joined by Mark Steer, our director. We'll also be joined by Diana Polson, who is our Senior Research Analyst, and Susan Spica, who is the Executive Director of Education Voters of Pennsylvania. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Mark?
Thanks very much, Kirsten, and thank you all for joining us. I'm the director of the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. And what we're going to do today is give you an initial reaction to the governor's budget. Later on in March, we'll be presenting a very long analysis that tied to our budget summit. And we will be sharing some information at the end of today's program about how you can join us at the budget summit. Now, most news reports from Harrisburg today are going to start by saying Governor Wolf presented the final budget of his administration, one in which he put forward proposals that continue to reflect the priorities he's held since he became governor. What those reports may leave out, however, is a critical part of the story. This budget is also the last chance for a Republican majority in the General Assembly that has mostly rejected the governor's priorities to act on them. And they should do so, not only because every poll shows that the majority of Pennsylvanians support them, but because the future of our children and our Commonwealth depends on following the path the governor set out for us, to provide adequate and equitable funding for education at all levels, to make it possible for workers to receive the training they need to benefit themselves and potential employers, and to fully fund human services, especially for children. Now, for 7 years, Republicans have mostly rejected the governor's priorities, although not entirely. We've seen some increases in funding for education, but not nearly enough. They said we couldn't afford those priorities. But as you can see from this chart we are putting up right now, by the end of June, thanks to federal American Rescue Plan funds and careful management of our resources, the state will have an accumulated surplus of an estimated $11.2 billion. Thanks to a strong recovery from the pandemic and continued federal assistance, that surplus is going to grow. Pennsylvania Republicans keep talking about future deficits, which we should say would not be a concern if not for the deep cut in corporate taxes they have supported in the past. The best way to avoid those deficits, however, is to invest in our people now, not just to give the economy a short-term boost, which it will, but also to give it the long-term capacity for expansion created by the major new investments called for by the governor in K-12 and higher education, in workforce training, and in human services. Those are investments that we're going to be talking about today. The governor's budget recognizes that a modern economy doesn't run on oil or gas or on the investment of capital. It runs on the skills and talents of an educated, well-trained, and skilled workforce. We not only have plenty of oil and gas, but we'll soon have plenty of solar and wind power to replace them. We have plenty of capital. Businesses are flush. They have plenty of money to invest. They're not doing it enough. The reason is we're not investing enough in people. Pennsylvanians and people are falling behind other states and other countries because we do not provide the human services our children need to get off to a good start. And we don't give every child the quality education and training they need to secure good paying jobs that bring success to them and also to the businesses for which they work. Our failure to invest in people hurts every Pennsylvanian now and in the future. And it reinforces rather than breaking down barriers of class, gender, and race. And by failing to break down those barriers, we betray the very basic promise of our country. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Spica, who's going to be talking about the education elements of the budget.
Thank you, Mark. Working on the technical stuff here. So we are incredibly excited about Governor Wolf's proposal for K-12 education this year. It is transformative. It is a literally once in a generation kind of budget that would make a difference for all children across the Commonwealth. So his proposal for K-12 education is to increase basic education funding by $1.2 billion. this would send all of this funding would go through the basic education funding formula. And with this investment, it would mean that more than $2 billion would be going through the basic education or fair funding formula, which is direct dollars to the school districts that have the greatest needs. Now, we've been watching the school funding lawsuit trial since the middle of November. We have seen just how deep the deprivation is in many, many school districts. And we know that we have a $4.6 billion gap between what school districts are spending now and what they need to spend. So while $1.25 billion going through the fair funding formula will make a difference for every child in every single school district, Governor Wolf has very wisely recognized that there are some school districts that are so far behind, where the deprivation in their buildings is so deep that they need to have additional funding accelerated to them. And so he has proposed, in addition to the $1.25 billion in basic education funding to all 500 school districts, he has proposed driving out $300 million through the basic education funding formula to the 100 school districts that are the most underfunded in the state. So these are the school districts that have the fewest dollars available to spend to meet their students' needs. They are urban, they are rural, they are suburban, they are spread across the entire Commonwealth, and they are school districts where students have been very hurt by the school funding system, and they serve a disproportionately high number of Black students, Latinx students, students with disabilities, and students living in poverty. So those funding increases are transformative. This budget also includes a $200 million increase for special education, which is something that we really need because the state, we like to refer to this as a staggering story of state neglect. Between 2008, 2009, and the next 10 years, our special education costs have grown by more than $2 billion, and the state investment has been, tiny, like $110 million, a little bit more than that. So when we talk about increasing property taxes, when we have school districts that have to pay to educate kids and they need to have the services that our kids need, when the state funding isn't there, all of that funding comes from local dollars. This is a good step in the right direction in terms of beginning to commit to funding special education at a reasonable level from the state. So our next slide with charter school stuff. Oh, and then in addition, there's $5 million for career and technical education. The PA SMART program, which helps connect schools and students to jobs to each other. There's a $20 million additional investment in that. And then this next reform is something that should have home and business owners who pay property taxes like out in the streets cheering for joy. Governor Wolf has proposed charter school reform that would save a total of $373 million each year, simply by matching the tuition that school districts pay to charter schools more closely with the charter school's actual costs. So we would see $199 million a year in savings on cyber charter school tuition bills because Governor Wolf's proposal would have a flat rate for cyber charter tuition at $9,800 per student. Right now, we've got 500 different rates that range from $8,000 to $24,000 a student. It makes no sense, and we've seen that cyber charter schools waste millions of dollars every year on advertising and other things. So getting that in line would save $199 million. The other way we would better match funding for charters is to apply the special education funding formula that now is applied to all school districts using the same formula for charter schools, so that charter schools would receive a payment for a student who has a disability that is actually based on the cost of services that that student needs. Right now, a lot of charter schools are reaping huge profits off of students with disabilities. It's draining money out of school districts and taking money away from other kids with disabilities who are staying in their school districts. It's a very wrong system. It's really time for it to be fixed. This proposal also proposes to attract and retain teachers by having a minimum pay rate for teachers. That would be a $45,000 per year for teachers, up from the $18,500 range. We know we've got a teacher shortage. We need to make sure that we are adequately compensating teachers so that we can start to deal with this teacher shortage. And then the next slide, we're talking about higher education, and Governor Wolf, we haven't, again, an upside down system where through the Racehorse Development Fund, we are paying more money to horse owners than we are investing in students. So Governor Wolf has again proposed the Nellie Blythe tuition program. $200 million would be used to provide scholarships for PASHE students, the state system of higher education students, and community college students who have a economic need. $100 million would come from the Racehorse Development Fund, and $100 million would come from the COVID relief funding. So this would help really make college much more affordable and accessible for students with financial need. It's a hugely important program that I hope people can get behind, because we're not going to have teachers if no one can afford to go to college to become certified to become a teacher, and for many other reasons. Governor Wolf is also proposing funding $75 million to be added to funding for the state system of higher education. Right now, Pennsylvania ranks 49th in the nation for its funding of higher education. This investment would bring Pennsylvania up to more like 38th or 39th place, which is not where we want to be, but it's a lot better than being rock bottom. So this would allow our state system schools to begin to reinvest after many, many years of austerity. And then there is, of course, the $100 million in the one-time funding that has been agreed to because of the university consolidations that happened last year. There would also be a 5% increase in funding for all the state-related universities. Community colleges would also see an increase. And then Governor Wolf has a $1 million proposal to help address college hunger on campuses. I think that as we go through this budget cycle, I hope we will all pay attention to how unaffordable higher education is in Pennsylvania, and how difficult and how far out of reach the dream of a higher education is becoming for students who come from working families. This proposal is a commitment to helping ensure that our young people who graduate from our K12 schools will have an opportunity to be able to go into college and to have the careers where we are going to need to have them be educated, so that we can have these thriving communities and a really strong Commonwealth. I think that is it. Oh yeah, and then pre-K, we have, Governor Wolf has always also been just a huge supporter of pre-K. So there's a $60 million increase for pre-K counts. This would provide another 2,300 slots, and then another $10 million for the Head Start Supplemental Assistance Program. This is a pre-K through higher ed program that would be transformative for children and families. And so we're really excited about it and happy to answer any questions later. So thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Susan, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to walk you through some of the key proposals related to the human services budget. Next slide. So the governor's proposing additional investments in childcare using both federal and state dollars. He's proposing $77.7 million in federal funds to the Child Care Works program. This would increase the rates to ensure that there's equal access to quality childcare. The reimbursement rate was about 25% 2 years ago, but if this proposal passes, it will be increased to 60% if passed. I think the federal government recommends that reimbursement rates are more at the 75% level. So we're getting closer to that. Another investment he proposes is $44.3 million in federal funds to reduce the co-payment for families using the Child Care Works program. $6.1 million in federal funds to expand the hours of Child Care Works programs, because we know a lot of families, don't work kind of your typical 9-to-5 jobs. And then there would be $30 million in a state investment for a new childcare model for state workers who work in Harrisburg. Another proposal he's making is to spend $3.2 million in creating a new statewide data system. And this would link information across programs in childcare, education, and workforce. And this would help with future data-driven programming decisions that this state is making. Next slide. So long-term care facilities have been really strained by the pandemic. There's been workforce shortages that have gotten worse, and there's also an increased need for stronger regulations and increased staffing ratios. So the governor's proposing a $91 million increase, and matched with federal funds, this would be a total investment of $190 million. And this would be for medical assistant rates for skilled nursing professionals. This funding will allow facilities to begin hiring staff to implement increased staffing ratios that will be changed. Looks like they'll be changed in 2023. There's also a proposal for personal care homes. So personal care homes, are residencies that provide shelter, meals, and assistance with personal care tasks for older people or those with a disability. These homes have been closing in Pennsylvania in recent years at a rapid rate, especially those homes that support low-income individuals. So the governor's proposing a $50 million for supplementary payments for personal care homes. Another proposal that he's making is $32.3 million, 18 or 19 million of that is state funds. This is proposed to support individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism. And with this funding, 732 individuals will be able to move from the waiting list to the community living waiver program, and 100 individuals to the consolidated waiver program. And these programs, help individuals live more independently in their homes and in their communities. Next slide. So the governor's proposing a $14.3 million increase for SNAP benefits for low-income adults and adults with disabilities. This program supports between 75,000 and 95,000 eligible older adults and adults with disabilities. It would increase the amount from $20 per month to $35 per month per eligible adult. He also proposes $15 million or $23 million with federal funds for postpartum health and home visiting programs. The governor is proposing a $36.6 million increase in funding for county mental health services. This is proposed to be recurring funding in addition to kind of the one-time ARP funds targeted for this purpose. And this would restore 2/3 of the cuts to county-based mental health funding made during the Corbett administration. Another proposal is around substance use disorder treatment. In the year 2020, Pennsylvania saw an increase in overdose deaths across the state. The governor's proposing $15 million in state funds as stabilization payments to substance use disorder treatment providers. And the budget also includes $2 million in new funding of the Pennsylvania agricultural surplus system that is aimed to reduce food insecurity. Next slide. So one other thing I just wanted to note that there are some increased funding proposals to increase staffing levels. There's $1.4 million to increase staffing at DHS, $667,000 to strengthen older protective services at the Department of Aging. And the Department of Health, we know, has been strained with the pandemic over the last 2 years. So the governor's proposing $4 million to enhance the public health workforce, $7.2 million to better support the county and municipal health departments in PA. And those health departments provide public health services to about 42% of Pennsylvania's population. So that does it for the human services section. And I think I'm turning it over to Mark, am I right?
Right, I'm going to talk about a couple of other elements of the program. First of all, with regard to criminal justice and policing, many of you have heard that there's a $600 million yearly transfer from the motor license fund that goes to pay for the Pennsylvania State Police. When the motor license fund was created, most of that funding was expected to be used for roads and bridges, but a lot of it is going, as you can see, for the state police. The governor proposes using $141 million in general funds to reduce that $600 million. This is part of a long-term plan to gradually eliminate motor license fund payments for the Pennsylvania State Police. So those payments will come instead from the general fund. There's $35 million for grants and technical assistance to support community-led gun violence prevention efforts. The governor is calling for bail and pretrial reforms to reduce the amount of bail that's generally required. This will not only save counties from holding people in prison before their trials, but there's plenty of evidence that this will reduce recidivism on the part of people accused of committing crimes. The governor proposes $7.7 million to provide funding for body camera and mobile video technology. That's designed to record the police's interaction with the public and try to reduce instances of abuse by the police. And then there's a bunch of money, $1 million for re-entry services for women and $7 million for DHS to create beds for individuals leaving the state correctional facilities who have complex medical or behavioral needs. Again, it's part of the effort the governor's support in the past to reduce the number of people in our state prisons. There are a number of economic development proposals in the governor's budget. Some of them involve workforce training, which we're not talking about here, but has always been a very important part of the governor's initiatives. And some of them is funds designed to help businesses either start up or expand their operations by connecting businesses to providers of new technology or to people who can give them services to help them figure out how to expand their operations, how to create a business plan, how to secure the funding they need to go forward. This is really important at this time because, as you know, the pandemic has in some ways changed our economy. There's been a shift from brick and mortar stores to online buying. And as you know, there's been a problem with supply chains. One way to deal with supply chain problems is to increase manufacturing domestically, and that includes in Pennsylvania. So there's $1.5 million for the industrial resource centers that will partner with institutions of higher learning to deliver services to new and existing manufacturers. There's a $1.5 million increase for partnerships for regional economic performance network that creates an entrepreneurial internships and business incubation programs and other services that assist new and startup businesses in Pennsylvania. There's an additional funding of $18 million for the Ben Franklin Technology Development Authority to support startups in Pennsylvania. This also connects startups to providers of high technology in our universities and elsewhere. And then there's $2.35 million in additional investment for Invent Penn State. That's a Penn State program that's proved very successful in connecting entrepreneurs with academics at Penn State who have ideas that can be quickly turned into either new products or new productive services. Finally, there's some climate environment programs in the budget, which we won't have time to talk about in detail, but I just want to mention two things. First, there's a $10 million investment to create a state disaster assistance fund. As you know that with climate change happening, we have more and more instances in which there's one or another kind of climate disaster. The governor wants us to be prepared to deal with it by setting aside $10 million in this fund to help people who are harmed by climate-related incidents that may not raise to the level requiring federal aid, but which could require state aid. And then there's additional funding for the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. $5 million for the Department of Environmental Protection and $2.5 million for outdoor management and recreation programs at DCNR. This is, I should say, has not been a priority of the governor's over the last 7 years. It's one area where we think there should be more investment in the future. We have really radically cut the number of environmental inspectors at the Department of Environmental Protection over the last 15 years. And we at PBPC believe we should be increasing those things. Oops. I can't figure out which way to move slides on this thing on my laptop, sorry. There's a increase in the minimum wage, starting with the $12 minimum wage in July 1st, with 50-cent yearly increases to create a $15 minimum wage by 2028. This is, long overdue. Every state around Pennsylvania has increased its minimum wage from $7.25, sometimes in multiple cases. I think New York is up to about $13 statewide. I think it's already at $15 in New York City. There's simply no reason we shouldn't be doing this. And this is a good time to do it. We know wages are going up, but it would really help all businesses if we created a floor under which wages cannot fall, because that pushes up wages for everyone, gives businesses a level playing field, and it pushes up wages not just for people making the minimum wage, it pushes up wages for people making above the minimum wage. We will be coming out with new estimates about how many people will benefit from an increase in the minimum wage. But the last time we did those calculations last year, we found that about $6 billion would be added to the economy, and about, I think 1.5 million people in the state would get an increase in their wage. The governor's proposal also eliminates the tip minimum wage, establishing one fair wage. It calls for cost of living increases once the minimum wage gets up to $15, and it would end local preemption, allowing counties and cities across the state to raise the minimum wage above the state minimum if economic conditions would allow it or require it. And there are already places in Pennsylvania where a higher minimum wage than the state is certainly justified. There's the chart that shows you where all the states around us that have raised their minimum wage already. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about a tax change. The governor's not proposing any increases in taxes at all, although at some point we may need to do that. He does propose to reduce the corporate net income tax by 2 points on January 1st, 2023, with gradual reduction to 4.99%. I'll be honest, we are not thrilled about this idea. We don't think we should be cutting or need to be cutting corporate taxes at this time. We wouldn't oppose a small decrease in the corporate net income tax if we had an increase in taxes on income from wealth on the personal income tax side, and if we combined reductions in rates with worldwide combined reporting. That is, closing the Delaware and the Bahamas and Cayman Islands loopholes that allow multi-state and multinational corporations to escape from paying any corporate net income tax in Pennsylvania. The governor's proposal does include some add-back provisions that would reduce the ability of multi-state corporations to avoid paying any corporate net income tax. We actually don't think those provisions go far enough. And that's the end of our presentation. I'm going to stop our screen share, and we're happy to take any questions if people have them.
If the media has any questions, please feel free to ask those or place them in the chat. Thank you.
Hi, this is Nancy Morrill with the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition. Did the governor include a raise in the TANF benefits?
Diana, did you notice any increase?
Mark, I didn't see that in the summary that I read, or no one mentioned it in our briefings, but that's something that we'll ask about.
Thank you.
You have to keep in mind, we did not get any information about the budget till late last evening. So it's a 1,000-page book. We haven't gone through everything yet. Sorry. We'll get you that information now.
Jeffrey?
Jeff?
Oh, this is Jeff from Pennsylvania. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, two quick questions. One, I saw that in the human services part of the PowerPoint presentation, you noted an additional over 36 million for community mental health. Is that a cost of living, or is that just provider payments or something else? That was my first question. And the second question is on something I didn't see. It's for physical disabilities in the Office of Long-Term Living. I did go through the budget a little bit. I saw a big increase for community health choices line item and also for the long-term care line item. Do you know if those are cost of living increases or just general more funding in general for provider payments, or I don't know if you could provide any information on either of those? Thank you.
So I can say a word about the Medicaid lines. Those are adjusted every year based on estimates of caseloads and of costs. So as you know, the state has been moving from to provide managed care services for Medicaid, for senior living, as well as for medical care. And so the Community Health Choices Program, for example, grows every year based on expectations of caseloads and what the costs will be. So it's a general appropriation, but it basically pays the people who are providing the services for the number of people that they have. What was the other one you asked about?
Community mental health.
Mental health. Yeah. My understanding is that that is payments to county assistance offices to provide mental health, and each county assistance office will be able to spend those funds in the ways that make sense to them in terms of either staffing up people, paying people more, and so forth. And we should remind you, this is a recurring increase. There's also a one-time increase of, I believe, $50 million using ARP funds in the governor's Brighter Pennsylvania plan, which he announced last week, which is the plan to spend $1.7 billion of American Rescue Plan funds soon. Diana, did you want to add some things about those questions?
No, I think you covered it, Mark. Thanks. There was a question in the chat about early intervention. I haven't come across anything on early intervention. I don't know about you, Mark.
Not yet. It may be there. There is something I saw on infant care, I believe, but I don't. I'll be honest. I didn't jot it down, and I don't have it off the top of my head.
I did find one thing on early intervention. It says the proposal is to provide $1.2 million in funding to expand access to early intervention tracking by adding postpartum depression as a category for early identification.
Are there any questions from any media who have joined us today? If people need more information or have questions that are outstanding, please feel free to email me at snow, S-N-O-W, @pennbpc.org. I'm also going to put that in the chat for everyone.
I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat. I'm going to respond to Kristen before we finish up.
Okay.
Melanie Palone's point out, would it be more fair to have a $25 fee for residents in municipalities who have no local police force and rely on the Pennsylvania State Police for basic policing? We agree with you. The governor proposed that twice, or maybe 3 times in a row, and the General Assembly said no. But the basic idea is that in about 2/3 of the state, local policing is provided by the state police. In the other third, people pay taxes for local police forces. So if you're shifting general fund revenues, you're basically asking people in the parts of the state where they pay for local policing to pay for their local policing and then to pay for local policing statewide. And I agree that that's not really fair. And we should be providing some kind of fee for those areas of the state that rely on the state police for local policing. Walter Sue is asking about what's being done to move off fracking toward renewable energy. There's nothing being done directly to reduce the use of natural gas that's fracked. There are state programs that have been, along with federal programs, encouraging the development of renewable energy. And I think we will gradually see, as the costs of solar and wind keep declining, that most new energy generation in the state will come from renewables. The other thing that's going to happen is the state is joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which will limit the amount of greenhouse gases produced in the state and will raise cost for energy producers that use fossil fuels. So that will also create incentives for renewable energy and reduce the amount of natural gas used in energy production. Although the first thing that'll happen is I think we'll see coal and oil-fired plants either be converted or simply stop operating over the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Mark, thank you for the presentation, as well as Diana and Susan. Really appreciate everyone joining us. Have a safe day, and there will be more information on our website at the Keystone Research Center and Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center in the coming hours and coming days. Thank you.
Thank you.